Lansing, Michigan, is a city known for its resilience, a place where neighborhoods intertwine like threads in a strong fabric. But in the summer of 2007, a predator unraveled that fabric, one act of violence at a time. The name Matthew Emmanuel Macon would become synonymous with terror, a moniker spoken in hushed tones long after his reign of violence ended. Macon's story is one of rage, darkness, and chaos, an account that forces us to confront the horrifying potential of the human mind. His was not a crime of passion or opportunity, but a deliberate spree of unprovoked violence. This is the story of a man who brought a city to its knees, and the people who fought to rebuild in the aftermath. Matthew Emmanuel Macon was born in 1981 in Lansing, but his early years were far from idyllic. Raised in a fractured home, his childhood was marked by neglect and abuse, laying the foundation for the storm to come. Teachers described him as withdrawn and unpredictable, a child who oscillated between eerie silence and explosive outbursts. Macon's environment offered no sanctuary. He witnessed domestic violence regularly, internalizing the idea that power and control came through physical dominance. These formative experiences shaped his worldview, planting the seeds of his later crimes. By his teenage years, the signs of trouble were undeniable. Petty thefts and schoolyard fights escalated to violent altercations. Macon was in and out of juvenile detention centers, his behavior growing increasingly erratic and dangerous. Despite these warning signs, society failed to intervene effectively. The summer of 2007 was unusually warm in Lansing, and the oppressive heat seemed to heighten the tension in the air. Macon, freshly released from prison after serving time for burglary, found himself aimless. He had no stable job, no meaningful relationships, and no apparent direction. What he did have, however, was an all-consuming anger and invisible storm brewing within him. It began subtly, with him wandering neighborhoods, watching, waiting. Macon's hunting ground was the city itself, and his prey was unsuspecting women who had no idea of the horror that awaited them. On July 26, 2007, Lansing police were called to a modest home on the city's south side. Inside, they found a scene of unimaginable violence. Deborah Cook, a 36-year-old woman known for her warm smile and love for her community, was dead. Her injuries were so severe that seasoned investigators were shaken. She had been beaten with a blunt object, her body left in a position that suggested a cruel and calculated intent. There were no signs of forced entry, leading police to theorize that her killer had either been invited in or had found a way to surprise her. The brutality of Cook's murder sent shockwaves through the community. Her friends and family described her as kind, hardworking, and unassuming. She was not the type of person to have enemies, making her death all the more confounding. Unbeknownst to investigators, Cook's murder was just the beginning. In the weeks following Cook's death, more bodies began to surface. The victims were all women, ranging in age from their 20s to their 60s. Each crime scene bore the same hallmarks of violence: severe blunt force trauma, evidence of a struggle, and an unsettling lack of remorse from the perpetrator. Lansing's residents were gripped by fear. Women took to traveling in pairs or avoiding going out altogether. Hardware stores reported spikes in sales of locks, alarms, and other security devices. The local police force, overwhelmed and under immense pressure, worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. Matthew Emmanuel Macon's method of operation was chilling in its simplicity. He stalked his victims, learning their routines and identifying moments of vulnerability. Then, like a shadow, he would strike without warning. He used whatever weapons were available: a rock, a piece of wood, even his own hands. The sheer savagery of his attack spoke to a deep, unrelenting rage. It wasn't enough for Macon to kill; he sought to dominate, to obliterate any sense of security his victims might have felt. What made Macon's crimes even more terrifying was their apparent randomness. His victims came from different backgrounds, ethnicities, and socioeconomic statuses. The lack of a clear pattern made it nearly impossible for authorities to predict his next move. Despite his calculated approach, Macon was not infallible. His growing confidence led to carelessness. On August 27, 2007, a local resident noticed a suspicious man lurking near the scene of an attack. The description given to police matched that of Macon, whose name had already surfaced during the investigation due to his criminal history. The breakthrough came when DNA evidence from one of the crime scenes was matched to Macon. It was the hard evidence investigators needed to bring him into custody. On September 6, 2007, police arrested Macon, ending his reign of terror. Macon's trial was a media spectacle. The courtroom was packed with grieving families, curious onlookers, and journalists eager to capture every detail. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, including DNA matches, eyewitness accounts, and a chilling timeline of Macon's movements. As the details of his crimes were laid bare, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavy with grief and anger. Macon, for his part, showed little emotion. He sat stoically, offering no apologies or explanations. His silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the anguish of the families whose lives he had shattered. In the end, the jury found Macon guilty on multiple counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Lansing, Macon's conviction brought a sense of justice but not closure. The scars he left were too deep to heal quickly. Neighborhoods that once felt safe now carried an undercurrent of fear, a reminder of the summer when evil walked their streets. Deborah Cook's sister, Maria, became a fierce advocate for crime victims' rights. She worked tirelessly to ensure that no family would have to endure the same pain without support. Through her efforts, a local victims advocacy group was formed, providing counseling and resources to those affected by violent crime. For law enforcement, the case was a sobering reminder of the importance of vigilance and community engagement. Programs were introduced to improve neighborhood watch systems, self-defense education, and public awareness campaigns. Even in prison, Macon remains an enigma. Psychologists who have studied him describe a man driven by deep-seated anger and an insatiable need for control. Yet, when questioned about his crimes, Macon offers little insight. His refusal to confront the darkness within himself leaves experts and laypeople alike grappling for answers. What created Matthew Emmanuel Macon a monster capable of such brutality? Was it his traumatic childhood, his environment, or something more innate? The answer remains elusive, a chilling reminder of the complexities of human behavior. Even years after Matthew Emmanuel Macon's conviction, his crimes remain etched in Lansing's collective memory. For those who lived through the terror of 2007, the fear and paranoia he instilled were not easily shaken. Each anniversary of his arrest brought renewed media coverage, revisiting the case and re-examining the horrors he inflicted. Documentary filmmakers and true crime writers descended on Lansing in the years that followed, eager to tell the story of a city scarred by one man's unspeakable actions. Some residents cooperated, hoping to shed light on the resilience of their community. Others declined, unwilling to relive the trauma. For law enforcement, Macon's crimes became a case study in how a determined predator could evade capture, even in a tightly connected city. His ability to blend in, to move undetected, underscored the challenges investigators face when confronting crimes with seemingly random targets. The families of Macon's victims continued to grapple with their losses. Grief is a complicated process, and for many, the violent nature of their loved ones' deaths made closure impossible. Evelyn Thompson, whose daughter Alicia was one of Macon's victims, turned to advocacy as a way to cope. She began speaking at schools and community centers, educating others about the importance of personal safety and awareness. "I can't bring my daughter back," she said during one of her talks. "But maybe I can save someone else's." Other families took different paths. Some channeled their pain into private remembrance, holding annual vigils or planting gardens in honor of their loved ones. These small acts of healing were deeply personal, a quiet defiance of the darkness that had invaded their lives. Lansing itself changed in the wake of Macon's crimes. Once a place where people left doors unlocked and walked alone at night, the city became more cautious. This newfound vigilance was not necessarily a bad thing. Community awareness grew stronger, and neighbors began looking out for one another in ways they hadn't before. Neighborhood watch programs expanded, and the local police department introduced initiatives to foster trust and collaboration between officers and residents. These programs emphasized crime prevention, self-defense, and situational awareness, equipping the community to better protect itself against future threats. But for all its efforts to move forward, Lansing could never fully escape the shadow of what had happened. The fear Macon had sown lingered in small, insidious ways: a glance over the shoulder on a deserted street, the quickened pace of footsteps when walking alone after dark. Even with Macon behind bars, questions remained. Were there more victims? Could there be others who never came forward or whose cases remained unsolved? Investigators continued to review cold cases, hoping to find connections to Macon. While DNA evidence conclusively linked him to several murders, the randomness of his attacks left open the possibility that other crimes could be attributed to him. For some families of unsolved murders, this uncertainty was a double-edged sword. On one hand, they hoped for answers and justice; on the other, they dreaded the possibility of being tied to such a monstrous figure. Life behind bars for Macon was as unremarkable as his crimes had been horrific. Inmates and guards alike described him as an unassuming presence, a man who neither sought attention nor tried to blend into the background entirely. Psychologists who interviewed him noted his flat affect a complete lack of remorse or empathy for his victims. When asked about his motives, Macon offered vague, evasive answers, often steering the conversation away from his actions. Some experts speculated that Macon's violence was rooted in his need for control, a reaction to the powerlessness he felt in his early life. Others believed his actions were driven by a deep-seated rage, one that festered unchecked for years until it erupted in a spree of unspeakable violence. But Macon himself offered no insights. His silence left those who sought to understand his crimes grasping at straws, trying to piece together the puzzle of a man whose inner darkness defied explanation. Though Lansing would never forget the horrors of 2007, the city refused to let Macon's crimes define it. Instead, his actions served as a catalyst for positive change, a grim reminder of the importance of community resilience and mutual support. New initiatives focused on mental health awareness and early intervention for at-risk youth, aiming to address the root causes of violence before they could take hold. Schools introduced programs to teach students about empathy, conflict resolution, and the consequences of unchecked anger. These efforts were not just about preventing another Macon; they were about healing a city that had been deeply wounded. As the years turned into decades, Matthew Emmanuel Macon's name faded from headlines, but his story remained a dark thread in Lansing's history. True crime enthusiasts continued to analyze his case, searching for clues about what drove him to commit such heinous acts. For some, the fascination with Macon bordered on obsession. Online forums dedicated to unsolved crimes frequently discussed his case, debating whether his childhood circumstances or an innate cruelty had shaped him. Others rejected this fixation, arguing that it only glorified a man who had brought so much pain. In the end, the truth about Macon may never be fully known. His crimes were a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for evil, but they were also a testament to the resilience of those who survived his reign of terror. The story of Matthew Emmanuel Macon is not just a tale of violence; it is a story of survival, resilience, and the unyielding determination of a community to rise above its darkest hour. For Lansing, the summer of 2007 will always be remembered as a time when fear gripped the city, when a predator lurked in the shadows. But it will also be remembered as a time when neighbors came together, when families found strength in one another, and when a city refused to let one man's darkness extinguish its light. In the end, Macon may have taken lives, but he could not take away Lansing's spirit.